Hey there, thanks for joining me today. This is Laura Lynn with KeepInkingUp.com. I'm an independent demonstrator for Stampin' Up in San Antonio, Texas. And today I wanted to share a tip that I use when designing my cards. A lot of people ask me how I decide how to do things, and I just came across this very cool tool that I learned from watching videos from Kylie Bertucci. She's a demonstrator in Australia, and she had this fabulous idea, so I've kind of taken upon it to use it myself, and I wanted to share it with you as well. Now, in the past, what I've done is when I've been making card layers for my cards, I just kind of make them as I go, not really thinking about it, just kind of going. But I realize that not everybody can do that. So this tool is really helpful for people who are maybe new to card making and need a little bit of assistance in deciding what layers to use when and what those dimensions are. So please keep in mind that I live in the United States, so I use 8.5 by 11 cardstock, which means my card bases are 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 when they're closed. That's the size of the card, and so these dimensions that I'm going to share with you go with that style of a card. And so if you live in another country, you may use different cardstock, and so your dimensions will be different. But the idea is still the same. And so hopefully you can still learn from this fabulous tip that I learned from Kylie. So anyway, what I have here are two stacks of cardstock. The one in the color is the most important one. And what I've done here is I started with my 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 piece of cardstock. This is my standard size card. Let me show you a card base. Let me bring this in. This is a standard card base. This happens to be 4 1/4 by 11 folded in half. So this piece of cardstock that is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 fits the full size of a standard A2 size card, which is the type of card that I use. If you use a different type of a card, your dimensions will be different, but you'll still start with the piece that is a full size card. And then what I did is use different cardstocks, and I cut pieces that were a 1/4 of an inch smaller in both directions, which would leave me with an 1/8 of an inch mat around the entire piece. And like I said, I just continued to do that. I made layers. This is what I did before this, but I wouldn't have them to choose from, and I'll explain why that's important in a minute. So like I said, I just continued to cut pieces of cardstock that were a 1/4 of an inch smaller each time, and each time I also wrote on the back those dimensions, and that'll become important in a little bit. So I went ahead and just did this all the way to 11, and I numbered them for a reason, and I'll get to that when I talk about the white layers. But so I have 11 layers of cardstock here, and they're all different colors, and they all have the dimensions on the back of them. So when I go to start designing a card, what I do is pull out these layers, and I'll pull out the first one, because I know that's my base. That's what I'm going to start with. And then I'll decide how much of a border do I want to be showing, and that will vary depending on what kind of card I'm making. For example, when I use a lot of designer series paper, I tend to want to show off all the prettiness of the designer series paper, and so I will go ahead and use layer number 2 with the smallest border, because I want the designer series paper to be the star of the show. But if I want a little bit more of a border, maybe I want to show not quite as much, I will bring in a different layer, and I'll keep bringing in different layers until I decide, oh, that's the look I want, or whichever one it is. And you just keep going and say, oh, maybe I want that much of a border showing. So I use these to play with the layout and see how much borders that I want. And you don't have to stop with just one layer. Maybe I decide that I kind of like that, and so then I need to go with smaller. So maybe I want to layer up like that, so I have a thinner border and then a wider border. But you just keep using these pieces however you'd like to set up your card design. And then when you're happy with the card design, you can flip it over and say, okay, I need to cut my designer series paper or my cardstock at that dimension. So that's really helpful. Now what I have over here on the white is, let's say that what did I go? I said I wanted to do that one and maybe this one. Well, what if I wanted to put a little 1/8 of an inch border. I like to do an 1/8 of an inch mat around mine too. So what I've done is I've numbered my colored pieces. So let's say I want to add a little sliver of a frame around this one. Well, I pick up the 10 and I've got white. All of these are an 1/8 of an inch bigger. So you see, line up 10 with 10, and now I just have a little, it's a 1/16 of an inch. It's an 1/8 of an inch bigger, the whole layer is. And then I'll layer that and say maybe that's what I want to do. And then 8, I can pull the 8 if I wanted to add more layers, and I just keep adding. Maybe that's the card design that I want to do. So I use both stacks of cardstock and just play around with it until I come up with the card design that I want to go with. And then once I have that decided, then I can flip these over, and I know that I need to cut my matte piece with this dimension, with the the sentiment at that dimension, or whatever. I just can turn them over and keep these separate, and then I know what dimension to do. So instead of just cutting layers as I go, as I'm designing my card, I can now design my card, see what I like, see how I like the look of it, and then just flip over the pieces and know my dimensions to cut them at. So these are all really helpful to have. 8, 9, 10, 11. So I like to keep these all together. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And I store them in a clear envelope. So I just keep this because I consider this a design tool, so I want to keep them all together. So I'll slide them in this clear envelope, and that's how I store them. And so when I'm designing, I just grab out this whole envelope, and then I start designing. So let me put together a card using those thoughts. So I needed to make a thinking of you card. I have 2 dear friends who are fighting pancreatic cancer at the moment, and so I wanted to make them a card to let them know that I'm still thinking about them. Of course, I sent a card as soon as they were diagnosed, but I wanted to send another card just to let them know that I'm still, of course, praying for them and thinking about them as they're fighting this horrible, horrible disease. So I need to make 2 cards, so I'm going to make 2 cards today. Oh, I actually already have one already made, but so I'm going to start out with my card base that, like I said before, this is 4 1/4 by 11, and it's folded in half at 5 1/2. And then using my layers, I decided that I wanted to have a full layer of purple cardstock because that's the color of pancreatic cancer. I made this the full size of the card, and I ran it through my 3D Subtles embossing folder, and I don't know if you can tell, but I ran it through both directions. I ran it through vertically and horizontally, so it really looks like fabric. Isn't that texture just amazing? So you don't have to just run your folders through one direction. So I'm going to go ahead and adhere this gorgeous grape piece to my card base. I like to use the liquid glue, that way I can kind of shift it around so I get it lined up just right on my card base. So that's good. And then when I went through my exercise here, I ended up using number 6 for a piece of designer series paper because I wanted to show a lot of that beautiful texture from the 3D embossing folder. I wanted that to show on my card. So I wanted a smaller layer of my designer series paper. And if you watch my previous video on this, I did something very similar on a Christmas card. This started out with a piece of the Magnolia Lane designer series paper, and I used my Highland Heather blends to color the flowers. Isn't that pretty? What a difference that is. And what I did, the same as my video showed before, everywhere where you see the petal pink on these flowers, I colored with my dark Highland Heather, and then I finished off the petals with the light Highland Heather. And I didn't bother coloring the centers. Those were yellow to begin with, and I just left them there. So this was 6. So then I wanted to mat it with a white layer just to really make that pop. And so this is a number 6 from the white. That's why I numbered them, so I would know exactly which ones would go together for a very narrow frame. So I'm going to go ahead and again glue this piece to my white frame. And again, I like the liquid glue because now I can move it around and get it nice and centered on that mat. Okay, that looks good. And now I am going to add, I have a piece of our polka dot tulle ribbon because I wanted to make this a little feminine, and I'm going to put this up at the top third of the layered pieces. And I'm going to turn that over, and I'm going to use Stampin' Dimensionals to tack this down because I'm going to use dimensionals later to add this piece to the card base. So I'm going to go ahead and start by putting those two pieces on there. I can go ahead and finish putting some dimensionals around this piece so I can add it to my card base. I think I'll add one more up here. Okay, that looks good. I like to add a lot of dimensionals. They're not very expensive, and I don't want my layers to sag, so I put enough to support my layers very well. So I'm going to peel off all of those paper backings. I think I got them all. And now I can layer this. Make sure my card is going the right direction. I'll layer that into the center. And see how nice that is? You can see all of the texture around there, but you can still see quite a bit of the Designer Series paper. So that's why I chose those two particular layers. Ahead of time, I went ahead and heat embossed the Thinking of You image, and that came from the Good Morning Magnolia stamp set. So I'm going to add this to my card, and I cut that out using the, let's see, what's it called? The Ornate Frames dies that are in the holiday catalog right now. This actually was in a bundle with a Halloween set. I'm not that big into Halloween, so I did not purchase the bundle. I just purchased these dies, and I'm so happy to say that these are going to be carrying over into the next catalog. These are just such beautiful ornate dies, that's hence the name, Ornate Frames dies. They're just so fun, and I just love this one with all the little scrolly pieces. Isn't that so pretty? I think that's so elegant. And both of the ladies that are fighting pancreatic cancer at the moment, they're a little bit older, and so I did want something a little more elegant for them. So I'm going to peel off those backings, and I'll place that in the center over my polka dot ribbon. And then what I did is I made a little knot out of that same polka dot ribbon, and I'm going to add that with a glue dot to the side of my sentiment just to add a nice little detail. So I'm going to pick up a glue dot with my tied knot, and I'm going to stick it right there next to my sentiment. Isn't that pretty? I think it's just a really nice, elegant card, and it's perfect to send to my friends who are fighting cancer. Now on my other card that I made, I did the same exact thing, but I used a different image from the Ornate Frames dies. So this one, I used this frame right here, and this one is this frame right here. And I don't know if you can tell, you see all the pretty little stitching along there? I just think it's so pretty. So I now have two cards ready to go to send out to my dear friends who are fighting cancer, and I hope that they know that I am indeed thinking about them, and I spent a lot of time making them a beautiful card, and I hope they really enjoy it. So thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'd so appreciate it if you would like to order any of these products, that you would go to my online stores, and I will provide links to the products that I talked about today in the description below. So thanks again so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.